Welcome to Scoop, where you get the scoop on this week's news. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Scoop on Monday, November 3rd. November. It feels weird to say it, and here we are. The live chat is up and running and dynamic today. We're talking about hiking in Utah. We're talking about Christmas decorations. We're talking about margaritas. I don't know where this conversation goes from here, but thank you to all of you on the live chat and to our insiders for supporting us. I do have a quick business announcement related to our insiders. So for those of you who are listening on podcasts, we do have an insider group for the price of a cup of coffee once a month. It's just a show of support for Smarter News. You get invited to our live broadcasts, live interviews, and you get a few other perks as well, special discounts, special first looks. It's just a way that we can bring each other together for a little bit smaller community than what we see on social media. We get to know each other. It's actually a lot of fun. And part of the perks for this group was an ad-free podcast that we just started actually over the summer. Before that, we had no ads at all. And then we decided, well, could we partner with some businesses so that for those that don't feel compelled to be an insider, which we totally understand, we want to make Smarter News as big and as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. We thought, well, maybe the technology has increased enough that we could have better oversight over some of our partnerships. And that gets into a longer conversation about how podcasting works right now. Anyhow, the bottom line is we had an ad-free podcast, and then we had to quickly move platforms. So if you are used to an ad-free podcast and you're a Scoop insider, or you're someone that would like to opt for an ad-free podcast as a way to support Smarter News, just want to let you know that it's in a bit of a hiatus in the moment, but it's coming. And I think it's coming with an increase in benefits for being an insider. So thank you to those of you supporting us. Thanks for your patience as well, because we gave you something that we quickly took it away, which is something that we don't want to do, but we want to do it right. And we had a few lessons that we learned very quickly in the last couple months. And I think it's going to be better than ever. So thank you so much for that. If you're curious about becoming an insider, check out our show notes because it's all there for you. And we really appreciate it. It's fundamental to Smarter News. You know, one of the things I can say about Smarter News that I'm not quite sure many other people can say is that we are completely fueled right now, the majority fueled by actual people. So we're not partnering with these big businesses. We're not, running a bunch of ads and cluttering your space. We're not selling data. We're not doing any of that. And it's very strategic. Yes, it may hold us back from growing as quickly as others do. But I really believe in quick, concise, nonpartisan news that's focused on the audience, on the people, rather than focused on these business partnerships. That said, I think business partnerships can be helpful for us down the road. And I want to make sure that we make good strategic decisions. And one of the ways that we can do that is by showing whoever it is, look at our audience and how engaged they are. So without you, whether you are listening just because you like to listen, you don't want to be an insider, or you're investing in Smarter News, both of you have a role, and we appreciate you deeply, and thank you so much for that. So we have a lot of news to get to today. Feels like the tension is kind of ratcheted up. I don't know if it's coming with the Christmas music. Suddenly start seeing Christmas decorations. It can be joy-filled and also anxiety fueling, right? Because we're suddenly, wait a minute, we only have 2 more months of 2025. This feels like it went by in a blink. And it's been a really big year of news, a lot of different stories that we've covered, and then put on top of it, whatever story you're living in your own life. It's very easy to become quickly overwhelmed. We have some big stories in front of us today, though. We have all the news related to the shutdown that's continuing. Here we are meeting more or less. I mentioned it's a little fuzzy. The longest shutdown since 1980 was 34 or 35 days, depending on how you look at the dates and when it was solved. Very clearly, this shutdown is going to blow straight through that today. Even if there was some sort of solution that lawmakers came to this afternoon on Monday, we'd still have to go through the procedure of Congress. So we're still talking several days out. So that's really important. I know I talked about it last week, but if you see movement on this week, just know, okay, there's the headline, but then there's also the practicality. There's actually moving through the procedure of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the shutdown now at a historic pace that we're in so many days. into the shutdown. We also have a really important Supreme Court case that is being heard this week that could really impact not only President Trump's policies, but the lives of every single American because we're all linked through the economy. And this particular case has to do with tariffs and the power of the presidency. So we're going to get into that. So we got some heavy news to get to. Before I get to that, though, I like a little palate cleanser. A news story that you can look at and wonder, is this real? Because there's just well, let me just read you the headline. All right, I'm going through the news today. I'm trying to prepare something special for you, and this is what I stumble across. This is something whatever your political point of view, your perspective, I feel like we could all kind of look at this and think, huh, news that makes you go, hmm. The headline: Mississippi woman kills escaped monkey, fearing for her children's safety. Let's read about said woman who happens to be 35 and also a professional chef with children ranging in age from 4 to 16. This is the AP article written by Mike Schneider. Thank you to Mike. One of the monkeys that escaped last week after a truck overturned on a Mississippi highway was shot and killed early Sunday by a woman who says she feared for the safety of her children. Jessica Bond Ferguson said she was alerted early Sunday by her 16-year-old son, who said he thought he had seen a monkey running in the yard outside their home near Heidelberg, Mississippi. She got out of bed, grabbed her firearm and her cell phone, and stepped outside, where she saw the monkey about 60 feet away. Bond Ferguson said she and other residents had been warned that the escaped monkeys carried diseases, so she fired her gun. Quote, I did what any other mother would do to protect her children, Bond Ferguson, who has 5 children ranging in age from 4 to 16, told the Associated Press. I shot at it and it just stood there. And I shot again and he backed up. And that's when he fell. So what in the world, like, of all the things that we're worried about, rhesus monkeys is going to be added to that list after I give you the details on this. So these rhesus monkeys had been housed at the Tulane University National Biomedical Research Center in New Orleans, Louisiana. Apparently, this research center provides monkeys, primates, to scientific research organizations, according to the university. I'm reading here still from the Associated Press. But catch this. In a statement last week, Tulane said the monkeys do not belong to the university and they were not being transported by the university. So wait a minute. The university says they don't belong. The monkeys aren't theirs. They weren't transporting them. So then so who do these monkeys belong to? And where were they going? That is a question that's not answered in this report. But apparently, the truck that was carrying these monkeys overturned. There were 21 monkeys in the truck. 13 were found at the scene and arrived at their original destination last week, according to Tulane. Another 5 were killed in the hunt for them. 3 remained on the loose before Sunday. So apparently, we still got 2 out there. Rhesus monkeys typically weigh about 16 pounds and are among the most medically studied animals on the planet. I mean, here we are. Yes, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Jenna, weren't you covering a story like this last year? In which case I would say, yeah, I actually was. Remember those monkeys that escaped from a South Carolina compound? That part of the reason they were in this compound is they bred for medical research and they were just on the loose. So anyhow, what do you say here? What would you do? She grabbed her cell phone, she grabbed her gun, and she went, I mean, is this real? Is this real? Apparently it's real. I don't know if there's a typo there about who these monkeys belong to. Maybe there's like a change of one word would really change the meaning of those few sentences I read. But what? Okay. So I feel like that just sort of sets the stage here. We got monkeys running around. We got government that's not funded. We got a lot of serious stories. I mean, this is why the news can feel overwhelming. So listen, if you're in Mississippi, keep an eye out for a monkey. You better believe I was like, Texas is not that far from Mississippi. What would I do if I saw a monkey in the backyard? I don't think I'd be that brave. Also, kind of I mean, poor monkeys, like that's not their fault. Trying to run free. Okay. So I know what's going through my head, how many monkeys jumping on the bed. Okay, I'm gonna leave that there. I'm gonna leave it. I'm just like, okay. That's not what I was expecting. Okay, other quick housekeeping item that actually is quite serious. So I'm going to take a quick turn here. But I think this is important. And it's another way of showing you that even when you work in the news, you got to be careful about what you see. This is an Associated Press title that, as I was, again, I look at the news wires early in the morning, because the news wires are what's going to be fueling a lot of the stories around other news organizations. So the Associated Press dates back to the mid 1800s. They're a worldwide provider of news wires. So this is why I'm looking at all of these to see what's out there. I actually missed this story going into Halloween weekend. You might have as well. And there was an announcement by the FBI director about a terror plot of some sort being foiled. Well, the Associated Press has this article up with a headline: Michigan lawyer says a Halloween terror plot that the FBI director Cash described never existed. So, because it was the first time I heard about this story, I thought, okay, well, never existed. So I read a little bit into it. It looks like the FBI director talked about this on social media. Maybe we didn't have the full, all of the information available. You have a lawyer defending some of these folks that were arrested. And the lawyer says, what are you talking about? This isn't real. Well, then you get something this morning from Pam Bondi. Let me see if I could pull this up for you. For those of you who are watching live on our insider chat. So this is a 73-page criminal complaint, complete with pictures, surveillance, weapons. This is what Pam Bondi was working through or putting out there today, probably in reaction of it. We don't know, but sometimes when you do see stories come out that are doubting law enforcement, then law enforcement is going to go ahead and try to share some more information. And so just this morning, she put out this on X: our newly unsealed complaint reveals a major ISIS-linked terror plot with multiple subjects arrested in the Eastern District of Michigan targeting the United States. According to the complaint, subjects had multiple AR-15 rifles, tactical gear, and a detailed plan to carry out an attack on American soil. And she goes on to thank the FBI. So this is the criminal complaint. But if you only saw that headline by the Associated Press, let me go ahead. You can see this criminal complaint. If you only saw that by the Associated Press, then you may think it's not real. And so here's where your sources really matter. I just happened to catch this from Pam Bondi. It wasn't a story that I was necessarily going to cover for you because I wasn't quite sure what was going on because of what the lawyer in Michigan said. It looked like we needed to wait a little bit. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you just need to wait. But it looks like there's more to this story than perhaps what the Associated Press headline infers. And this is why we have to be careful and double source. So this is a story that we're going to watch this week. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's happening or not happening with the government shutdown. And big picture here, we have a lot of lawmakers that are not in Washington, D.C. because they don't necessarily need to be there. The House is not in session. They haven't been in session for several weeks. The Senate has been in session, but they went home over the weekend because it didn't look like there was any progress being made. You have the president returning from an overseas trip, and he's sitting down with 60 Minutes for the first time. He sat down in 60 Minutes for a long time. And during this interview, he was asked about his role in the shutdown, but also in solving the shutdown. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what he had to say.
Let's vote. And you can open, the economy could open up during our interview.
Is there something you can do,
Maybe it did.
though? Is there something you
All I
can do to bring this
is
to
give
an
the
end?
facts. Here's what I can't do. I can't give them $1.5 trillion so that they can give welfare to people that came into our country illegally, so that prisoners and that people from mental institutions and people that are drug dealers get vast amounts of money for health care. That I can't do.
So
what I can do is I can continue to run a great country. We have the best economy we've ever had. I can continue to do that. What they should do, look, this started a long time ago. I always said, and you know I've been very consistent, Obamacare is terrible. It's bad health care at far too high a price. We should fix that. We should fix it. And we can fix it with the Democrats. All they have to do is let the country open and we'll fix it. They have to let the country open and I'll sit down with the Democrats and we'll fix it. But they have to let the country. And you know what they have to do?
Okay, so at least you hear a little bit of how the president is talking about this. I want to walk you through what he said here. Part of this conversation went into a procedure called, I don't even know if procedure is the right word. You hear the term filibuster. There's a procedure that's in the Senate that requires a certain majority, a certain number, a higher than majority vote to get a bill to pass into a period of time for the bill to be considered and voted upon. So if you think about what happened in high school and student council, whoever got the most votes wins. And it's easy to think that way about bills, any legislation that's passed. Well, whoever gets the most vote wins. Yes, that's true. But sometimes you need an additional number of votes to get over this procedural hump to get to the actual voting session. And what has both parties have toyed with over the years is to get rid of this procedure, easy enough for me to say, get rid of the filibuster. So the party that's in the majority has more ease to pass what they need, because you just need a majority then. You don't need 60 votes. You need 51. And that's it. And even with a slim majority, the party that would be in power would be able to move legislation more easily. The House and the Senate have different roles in government. In many ways, the House was structured to be, for lack of a better term, a little bit more emotional. People get elected every 2 years. They're going to quickly or not quickly represent their constituents. They're moving at a faster pace. For senators, they're elected for a 6-year period. So the Senate is there and has been viewed and described as a more, I don't want to say stable form of government, but it has that reputation. Things are going to move a little bit more slowly. The senators are there for a little bit longer. There's different procedures in place. So the question here is about what actually gets this continuing resolution, which is a temporary funding bill, to an actual vote in the Senate. What happened back in the spring was that Democrats agreed to at least let the bill get to a vote. When the bill got to a vote, Republicans passed it. And Senator Schumer and other Democrats were criticized for not holding the line, preventing that vote from taking place. Because as soon as the vote takes place, the bill's going to pass. So this is the situation we're in right now, where even the president of the United States is saying, hey, Republicans need to get tougher. That's one of the things that he said. He said, yes, Democrats could do away with the filibuster and they're going to be able to pass whatever they want to pass. But right now, what Republicans need to do is get tough, do away with the filibuster and get this to a vote and get the government temporarily funded. Even that, though, there's a question about process with it. So when we talk about what's going on with the shutdown, there's always a clock attached to it that we're not always aware of. And this is something that is, the clock is continuing to tick as lawmakers are trying to figure out their next steps. What is an interesting part of this story to now consider is that the original temporary funding bill that the House passed would only fund the government to November 21st, right before Thanksgiving. So we're coming up on that pretty quick. And then you would have to have another vote, a continuing resolution, a temporary bill, likely to keep the government up and running and funded through the holidays. So all of these timelines are merging and intersecting and bumping into each other. Because even if this original temporary funding bill is passed, it's only going to buy lawmakers a little bit of time before they have to renegotiate again. That doesn't seem to be coming across very clearly, and that's going to be more of an issue. This timing of all of this is going to become even more and more of an issue, especially as we get closer to the holidays. And I know you're already hearing the Christmas music. The transportation secretary was asked about this, about the impact on the FAA. So as we went into the weekend, the FAA sends out a message on X and essentially says the government has to get funded. We're starting to see, labor shortages because our federal employees are being asked to show up for work. They're not getting paid, and this is a problem. And we could look at that at a smaller level. Okay, there's fewer TSA agents. But when we talk about air traffic control and how that's impacting travel across the United States, then it feels like the stakes go up quite a bit. So the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, was asked about this. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Should Americans also have safety concerns at this point?
Listen, I think that's a great question. We work overtime to make sure the system is safe, and we will slow traffic down. You'll see delays. We'll have flights canceled to make sure the system is safe. But we have to be honest, when we have controllers where we have shortages in towers and TRACONs doing two jobs, does it add more risk into the system? Sure it does. But again, we're always managing that. Again, we don't want crashes. We want people to go safely. And so we will slow and stop traffic if we don't think we can manage it in a way that keeps people safe as they go from point A to point B. I'm clearly asking them, come to work. It is your job to come to work, and eventually you will be paid. But as I've traveled around the country and talked to air traffic controllers, they've told me that a lot of them can navigate missing one paycheck. None of them can manage missing two paychecks. So we have old equipment. We have technicians that work in the towers that keep the equipment operational. They're not getting paid. I have train inspectors who are working to keep our trains running and running safely. They're working without pay. I have pipeline inspectors, same thing. Across the system, we have a number of people who are working without pay. We talk about the air traffic controllers, but I have thousands of employees who are showing up, doing the work, and trying to keep this system safe for the American people, all the while they don't get paid to do it.
I thought that was a really important soundbite to listen to because, yes, the focus is clearly on air traffic controllers because how could it not be? It's really scary to even think about not having an extra level of protection for planes landing and departing. But then what the transportation secretary is talking about is a whole bunch of other roles that likely a lot of us don't think about that are also working without pay right now that many of us would probably consider pretty essential. And because they're considered essential, this is why they're having to work. But what we saw during a previous shutdown is suddenly there was a lot of call outs. People saying they're not going to come into work, maybe they're not feeling well, whatever. And that was one of the pressure points that led to at least fuel some negotiations. I see a note from Tara. Tara, yes, Jenna, my little brother is being expected to work 50 plus hours of work as an air traffic controller, all not getting paid. Yeah, and Tara, I'm curious how he feels about that because surely that doesn't feel good, but he probably has a sense of duty, so he wants to show up. But how long can he do that? And that actually is one of the bigger parts of this conversation about the shutdown that we're skimming a little bit of the surface, which is how many Americans right now are actually working paycheck to paycheck. We all likely know what that's like, working paycheck to paycheck. How long could you go without really having to significantly dip into your savings or get outside assistance? That seems to be a broader conversation about pay and benefits and, for example, for air traffic controllers or otherwise. Another area that this comes up is in SNAP benefits. So likely you've seen or heard a little bit about SNAP benefits. These are federal assistance. This is money that the state is then administering to people in the state that need food assistance. And right now, the numbers suggest that just over 41 million Americans receive this assistance in some way. Hold up. Let's just stop right there. That seems to be a big headline. Isn't that the bigger story? Yes, it's the shutdown in the political process, but did you know that 41 million plus Americans were receiving this sort of assistance on a regular basis? Interesting to think about, just over $187 on average, apparently per person, as we're looking at the numbers. So depending on how your family structure and what that looks like, I don't know exactly how that looks like for every single individual that's receiving this assistance, but that's a big story. We have 41 plus, almost 42 million Americans on this form of assistance. The backstory to this is that the federal government came out under President Trump and said, we don't have any funds, so we can't distribute this come November. And we had two different cases pop up, one in Boston in federal court there and one in Rhode Island. So one in Massachusetts in Boston and one in Rhode Island. And basically these were legal challenges saying, hey, federal government, where the state is administering this, you have to dip into some of your emergency funds in order to give Americans the assistance that's been promised to them. What the government has said is, listen, we can't touch these funds. Yeah, we have emergency funds, but those are for things like natural disasters. We're actually not allowed to dip into those funds to pull them out because a shutdown is not considered a disaster that this sort of fund is made to be used for. So in general, just to summarize what the federal judges said going into the weekend is that basically the federal government has to figure it out, that they either need to dip into some of these funds or they need to dip into other funds to try to provide this assistance. So the judges kicked it back to the Trump administration and said, listen, you guys got to figure, whatever way you got to figure it out in some capacity. So today, what will be really interesting to watch, we're talking just after noon Central Time, is to see, do we get an announcement from the USDA, from the federal government, that says, okay, this is how we're going to temporarily try to solve for this, and or we're appealing those rulings by those federal judges to the Supreme Court, to a higher court. Both of those things could actually happen at the same time. But either way, we're in a little bit of a standoff here as to where these emergency funds could come from. But the federal judges, in some capacity, ordered the government to try to figure it out either today or over the next few days until we get to midweek. So this is going to be a story that we definitely need to continue to watch. So all of these things are percolating. There's all of these little fires. I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing them. I'm not dismissing them. But as these fires pop up that the federal government is having to figure out, the question is, does that actually translate to lawmakers to feel more motivated to try to find a path forward? And what does that actually look like? President Trump says that he has not liked the healthcare law passed under the Obama administration. Is there a path forward for President Trump and this administration and the Republicans that are under this umbrella to work with Democrats to improve it? Is that, if we're going to consider the worst case scenario, which is the shutdown continues, that nothing really improves at all, can we continue to consider the other scenario, which is there room for improvement in some of these programs, and is there a path forward? And right now, it doesn't seem to be clear. So the big takeaway is you got a lot of different people that are going to start needing more support, whether we're talking about air traffic controllers or those folks that receive SNAP benefits. As that continues, does the pressure rise on lawmakers to figure something out here? And what actually stops this impasse? I wish I had a better answer for you, something more enlightening. But right now, that's where things stand. So we'll see if it changes from here. In the meantime, we also have a big case that the Supreme Court is considering this week. And what's important about this case is that it has to do with tariffs. Tariffs impact the US economy, which is the largest economy in the world, and therefore impacts each and every one of us and how the United States exists as part of the global economy, our relationships with other countries, the goods that we have access to, and the prices that we pay. So this is a big deal. This topic of tariffs, although you can kind of get into the eye-glazing conversation about economic policy, this is one of the reasons why this story really matters. And as we've talked about for the last several months, we've seen several small businesses challenge the Trump administration and the power of this administration to unilaterally impose tariffs. In fact, we talked to one of these small business owners, Emily Lee. She runs a company called Simplified, which deals with a whole bunch of ways to simplify your life, including planners and recipe books and all sorts of things. She was great to talk to. I'll link to that interview so you can listen to it. When it first came out, these tariffs, Emily, along with others, decided to file a lawsuit. This is the lawsuit that now has wound up in the Supreme Court. And so let me just give you a little bit of an overview of this because the stakes are very high. The administration is arguing that the president has this power to impose tariffs basically at will because of a 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The small businesses that have come together to file this case, this lawsuit, say that the president can't act. This sort of law didn't empower the president to unilaterally act in this way. The administration's argument is that the White House has declared a national emergency in a few different capacities. Remember, when President Trump came into office, he declared two emergencies. One was about the illicit drug trafficking that has been happening regarding our border that involves many different countries, whether we're talking about Mexico or talking about China, and also a national emergency regarding illegal immigration. So let me step back. The illicit drug trafficking and illegal immigration is one emergency. Then you have a second emergency is a lack of reciprocity in bilateral trade relationships in April. So there's these two ways that the president is saying we are in an emergency situation. Therefore, I can act in a way that helps get us out of this national emergency. And one of the ways I'm going to do this is use tariffs to our benefit. There are those that say that is not a power that the president gets to have by himself, that it actually is a power that belongs perhaps to Congress, but certainly not just to the White House. Otherwise, the president has too much power. I want you to listen to how the president talked about this in the 16 Minutes interview that just aired last night.
You can't have Congress This has to be quick and nimble.
Well, you just
As an
finished that
example,
sentence. You said, if they take away my power to do tariffs, what?
it would be a very sad day for the United States of America. We're making a lot of money. We're respected again all over the world. We have great national security. Let me give you an example. With China, they were, very strongly threatening us, frankly, with the rare earths. And then I said, well, if you're going to play that card, I'm going to put a 100% tariff on over and above what you're already paying, which was 55%, which was very high. A lot of money coming in, tremendous money like we've never seen. I'm going to put a 100% tariff on everything over and above. And you know what happened? We got a phone call 20 minutes later. We'd like to talk. If they take away the right to tariff, if we're forced to use Congress to approve, they can't approve anything. They would be sitting around for years debating whether or not we should use tariffs.
You want that power. You want that executive power.
You need it to protect our country. This is a national security. Tariffs are national security. If you take away the right to tariff, and remember this, tariffs have been used against us.
And can you just answer that question that tariffs have led to inflation? They have led to an increase in cost of
They haven't led to
living for
inflation.
most
We have
Americans.
no inflation.
Okay, I wanted to run that soundbite for a few different reasons, including those remarks just at the end about inflation. But you can see how the president saying this is a power that he needs in order to negotiate. And here I think we're getting a better understanding about the stakes of how the Supreme Court rules on this, because this is a cornerstone of the president's economic and foreign policies, is having the power to wield these tariffs in the way that they believe are fit to these different countries in order to get better results for the United States of America. What this act does not mention in it, so again, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, it does not mention specifically tariffs, taxes, or duties, but it does permit the president to regulate the importation, so imports, of any property in which any foreign country or national thereof has any interest after declaring an emergency. So these are the arguments. How the Supreme Court is going to rule on this, TBD. And typically for some of these cases that we're hearing in the fall, we're not going to get a decision until May or June, sometimes early July. But really, that June period is when things really heat up. You get a lot of decisions from the Supreme Court. In this case, we could see potentially an emergency decision just because this is happening right now. It's affecting small businesses right now. It's affecting consumers right now. It's affecting the way that the White House is leading. So those are a couple things to watch for as we take a look at this case. It's going to be heard midweek, is not only how the justices feel about the questions that are being asked, but also could we get any indication that we could see a decision that's a little bit sooner than typical. So you heard that little back and forth about inflation. I want to talk to you about that because I'm seeing this conversation come up quite a bit, whether it's with the president in 60 Minutes or otherwise. You have those that are saying, wait a minute, there's no inflation. What are you talking about? And then others are saying, wait, there is inflation and the American people are really struggling with it. So I just want to point this out to you because I think this could be very helpful as we continue to talk about the economy in the future. There's two different ways to look at inflation. We can look at an inflation rate. This is something that we want to look at sort of like a thermometer. The higher the reading, the hotter inflation is. And typically, you don't want hot inflation. We want to keep the inflation rate down. We're talking about our rates. We're not talking about a specific price. So if we take a look at this, let me go ahead and pull this up. I was taking a look at some data that was available for each presidential term for the presidents over the last several years. You can see under Jimmy Carter, the overall inflation rate during his term in office was just below 10%. If you go a few bars down from that, you can see for President Biden, it was just under 5%. If we go down a little bit further, you can see that President Trump during his first term, inflation was hovering right around 2.5%. So when President Trump is talking about, wait a minute, we don't have inflation, he's likely referring to the inflation rate. We do expect to see inflation around 2-ish%. In general, that indicates a healthy economy, or it's been understood that way. Well, why would that be? Wouldn't we rather just see zero? Well, the reason why we want to see an inflation rate of a few percentage points is that it indicates a growing economy. I expect to pay more for milk than I did a couple years ago. Then I paid during the first Trump administration. Then my parents paid. We can go even further back. It would make sense to you, right? The economy has grown. We're bigger. And therefore, I'm not going to pay the same price as what my parents paid for certain goods. at the same age that I am right now. We expect to see a little bit of inflation. We expect to see things are growing and moving. And so we want to see a little bit of inflation in the economy. We don't want to see stagflation or deflation. Those are different things, but let's just talk about inflation. The higher the inflation, the less your dollar buys you. So that's why we want to see inflation rates around 2%. What Nora O'Donnell in 60 Minutes was likely talking about, again, kind of reading through, there was this constant disagreement about inflation during this interview, is talking about actual prices and affordability. So, yes, there can be inflation in the economy, a presence of inflation. But the question then becomes, well, what does it actually cost for me to buy things? And when we see the cost of goods, because we do see inflation still in the economy, we see the cost of goods have continued to go up. They're not going down. We're not suddenly paying a lot less for things than we did last year at the same time, with the exception maybe of egg prices, because we know there was a lot of different dynamics at play in that particular market. So yes, both things can be true. The president can say, well, we don't have that much inflation because the inflation rate, I think at last read, depending on which one you look at, is right 2.5%, 3%. And then what Nora O'Donnell, a journalist, is saying is, well, wait a minute, people feel like they're not able to buy as much as they once did. Their dollar is buying them less. Affordability is not as accessible. Therefore, they're feeling the pangs of inflation, but more likely affordability in general. And so they're both talking about important topics, but they're not talking about the same thing when it comes to inflation. So I hope that's clear. We tend in the news to try to use sometimes economic data or theory or terms, and sometimes we don't use them the right way. The reason why I say that is because I was definitely guilty of that as a young journalist with just no experience in business news at all. I had to learn quickly working at Forbes, working at a local news desk where I helped produce the business show. It was a lot of learning because I didn't come from a business background. I never ran a business. And also I didn't take business classes in school. I wasn't a business major. So there are times that sometimes in the news too, we're sort of conflating a lot under one term. And with inflation, we can do that. So what would be a better way to talk about that issue is actually to acknowledge with the president of the United States. And some of you have asked, well, what would you do different with the 60 Minutes interview? I think what Nora O'Donnell was touching on is really important because it's what Democrats are really talking about as well as a way to try to make inroads against Republicans. I don't think she was talking about it because she's being partisan. I'm just saying this topic is coming up a lot about affordability. So that's really important to all of us. We want to be able to go to the grocery store and feel like we're getting something for our money. It doesn't feel good when you go to the grocery store and you spend $100 and you get one bag of goods and you're like, what did I buy? So one way one could approach this question is to say, when the president says, hey, we don't have any inflation, to say, yeah, you're correct. We're seeing the inflation rate is much lower than during the Biden administration. That's true. The inflation rate has gone down. But the American people don't feel like their dollar is buying them more. It feels more and more from my reporting from this data that their dollar is buying them less. What's your plan to make sure that the American dream is affordable to every American? You see, so you change, if we keep using that term inflation is too generic in general. We're not going to get an answer on this. And the reality is that the government is somewhat limited about what they can or cannot do when it comes to pricing. One of the ways that they can do something has to do with tariffs and the price on imports, what's going on import-export business. So that would be one way that one could approach that topic. But I did see a lot of that, and I'm seeing a lot more of that, of conflating the term with inflation. And I think we have to be a lot more careful because I think these are really important conversations to have. So we'll watch to see what's happening with the Supreme Court. This is a very big case. It is in the highest court of the land. It has a lot of impact potentially on all of us. Could the Supreme Court rule against the president? And then what happens to the president's policies? Big question. The Treasury Secretary seems to suggest that there's other ways that the president would continue to levy tariffs with the president. And what this president values is having that power to be able to go onto the world stage and have these negotiations. So big case to watch. And I want to make sure that you had a little bit of information on that. Well, speaking of just elections, presidents, and what sort of political platforms are out there, I listened with great interest to an interview with former Vice President Kamala Harris. I was just curious. She's out with a new book that's detailing her 100+ days running for president. She's doing a lot of different interviews. Do you think she should come on Smarter News? Would you like an interview with her? Curious what you think your level of interest is. I'm always curious about timing and messaging. And this book is coming out, very quickly. Here last year at this time, think about that. Last year at this time, we were just going into the elections. By the way, we do have elections also tomorrow in many different locations. It may not be in your area, depends, but nationally, it's an election day. It's one of the big areas we're watching is the mayoral race in New York City. We're watching what's going on in the state of Virginia. And one of the reasons we're watching these races is to get an understanding about where the American people are. Who are they favoring? What policies do they want to hear about? What motivates people to get out and vote? No matter if it's in your particular area, this is why we pay attention to these elections. So interesting that Vice President Harris has this book out already and is talking about a very specific moment in time. And there's questions swirling about her political future. One of the things she talked about is Democrats becoming more bold with some of their policies. And here's one idea that she had. I'm curious what you think about this.
I think we should reduce voting age to 16. If they're voting right now at 16 and up, they're going to be talking about the importance of climate. They're going to be talking about the importance of figuring out how AI is going to affect the future of the workforce. They're going to be focused on what are we really doing about affordable housing. And basically in politics, here's the hard truth about this. There are two centers of power that tend to influence how politicians think. Groups that vote the most and people who write the most checks. And I'm going to go every day with the people, and thinking about how do we strengthen people actually going to the polls and voting.
Why is the voting age set at 18? It might surprise you that that hasn't been the case for many of us during our lives. This is something that happened just in the 1970s. So let's back up. In the 1860s, you saw the 14th Amendment pass, and it established who was going to vote. It set that age at 21. Well, that was debated for many years, but you get to the 1970s and the Vietnam War, and you have Americans being drafted at the age of 18, but the voting age is still 21. And so there was momentum to include a new amendment to the Constitution. It's the 26th Amendment that set the voting age at 18 rather than 21. And just recently. So it would likely take the same, it would not likely, it would take the same sort of process for a constitutional amendment to lower the voting age yet again. Do you think that's a good idea? Should Americans vote at 16? One of the arguments that the vice president made is that it would include a whole tranche of people into the political process and get them engaged early. And because they're the ones that are going to be affected by these policies, get them involved in the political process and early on get them moving into that so they know their personal responsibility as a citizen, get them engaged. What is the argument against it? You can drive at 16. Can you vote at 16? What's the argument against just dropping the age to 16? Well, there may be an argument depending on your political persuasion. Let me show you this graph. This is from Pew Research just last year. They were taking a look at who aligned with what party depending on age group. And the overwhelming majority of younger Americans, they were looking at 18 to 24, 25 to 29, 30 to 39, skew or lean Democrat. So this would likely be more beneficial to the Democratic Party. They would have more young voters that tend to lean their direction. Not all of them, but a fair majority. When you get into the ages of 40 to 50, and you can even see it in this graph, it even really extends past that. So 40, 50, 60, you start seeing more Americans tilt more conservative to Republican. But between 40 and 60, what you're seeing is a very evenly divided nation about what political groups they're associated with. So, what do you think about this? Is this just an idea lobbied by a former candidate for president to increase votes for Democrat causes? Or is it something that we should consider, especially as the economy and the world is changing so quickly? Get the younger people engaged faster. That's going to be better for America overall. What do you think? What's your point of view about this? In general, we don't have, there's a fair amount of Americans that don't vote at all. So would this motivate Americans across age groups? If you knew a 16-year-old could determine the fate of the country, would you be more likely to vote if you're older than 16? What do you think about that? It's very interesting. Mary says absolutely not 16. Mary, I'm curious as to why. Tell us why. Uh, let's see here. Tori says absolutely not a fan of that idea. I agree. 18 is when we say kids can go to war. They should have the right to vote. What makes her think a 16-year-old should have the right to vote? Well, she listed out a couple of those different reasons why. And she said also because of the pressing issues that include AI. She said one of the things that you're going to see for that generation of Americans is that the job market is changing very quickly. All these things that really impact their lives. So get them involved in politics so they can help make decisions. Natalie says this, I heard two teenagers speak at my local No Kings rally. I was pleasantly surprised at their well put together thoughts and opinions. Not sure they are mature enough, but happy they're engaged. Good point though, Natalie, right? Does it have to be to vote? Or can it just be, engagement just overall? All right, Amanda says, my 16-year-old says no. She says they're not mature enough at all and would vote on vibes. Your 16-year-old is hired as a political analyst for Smarter News, Amanda. Thank her for her comment. I love that. Vote on vibes. Vote on vibes. I could see that. So Kathy says, I would love to hear from anyone who thinks 16 is a good idea. So let's see. An interesting conversation. It's an interesting conversation and a way in for us to find out, well, why did we actually choose that year? 18. Okay, really has to do with this Vietnam era. Well, we had a draft going. You had a lot of young people politically engaged in a new way in America. And those in power decided to put a proposal together. And so here we are. 18 is just the age that we assume it's always been, but it hasn't always been. In the past, it was 21. In fact, interesting, it was Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the folks that came forward many years ago and said, maybe we should think about dropping it from 21 down to be a little bit younger. So the conversation was ongoing, but we didn't see movement like that. All right, I want to finish up here with a question that I get a lot asked. And this is about, it actually has to do with the Constitution as well. And it has everything to do with whether or not President Trump could run for a third term. Where is this coming from? So we get this question, we've addressed it before, but I don't have a problem addressing it again. And part of the reason why we're getting this question is because of an interview that Steve Bannon did. Steve Bannon, as many of you know, has been a popular broadcast host. He's been an advisor of sorts to different conservative leaders, thinkers, and he's sitting in an interview and he said this.
All the haters hate it, but this is the age of Trump. He's totally redefined politics and power in America. And how did he do that? With no political training, because he was a populist and he was a nationalist at the very moment that if you didn't have populist nationalism stopped the managed decline of the country by the elites of the nation.
And does he need a third term in order to see that job through?
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president in 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28. We had longer odds in 16 and longer odds in 24 than we got in 28. And President Trump will be the president of the United States, and the country needs him to be president of the United States. We have to finish what we started. And the way we finish it through Trump is a vehicle. I know this will drive you guys crazy, but he's a vehicle of divine providence. He's an instrument. He's very imperfect. He's not churchy, not particularly religious, but he's an instrument of divine will. And you can tell this of how he's pulled this off. We need him for at least one more term, right? And he'll get that in 28.
You're not driving me crazy. I'm trying to understand the coherence of the things you've just told me in the last few minutes. On the one hand, you've said the Constitution is fit for purpose. Secondly, you've said that President Trump needs another term, even though the 22nd Amendment makes pretty clear that he cannot have another term.
Why does it make that clear?
Because he's on his second term already.
At some point in time, we will make sure we go through, Zanny, and define all those terms.
But even if
We
you
will
find
define
a
all
way
those
to
terms.
undermine you will be undermining the spirit of that amendment, even if you find some way around it. And to those
Can the
people who
American
can,
people, if the American people, with the mechanisms we have, put Trump back in office, are the American people tearing up the Constitution? Would that be tearing up?
Well,
No,
this-
would the American people be going against the spirit of the Constitution, ma'am?
I think yes, actually, because I
You
think
say-
what you will end up with
So you're
is
saying the
a
American people-
populist justification for a quasi-dictatorship.
That's not true at all. Trump
That's
works.
what it sounds like.
It's not. Trump is a dictatorship. Did you just see the compromises he had to make on the big beautiful bill? You see the compromises he has to do on everything, on accommodating Zelensky, on what President Trump. President Trump is nothing but a series of negotiations to kind of keep this thing rolling forward, where he's having trade-offs all the time.
But
How
Steve,
can
you've just spent the
please give me
last 20 minutes
please-
telling me we have to
please-
smash the other side. There's no room for debate. There's no room for compromise. We must smash them. And now you're telling me this is a negotiation. I mean, that's
No.
I guess that's why
on
it
his
seems to me
on
some
his
kind of
policy.
tension
First
there.
off, the only way President Trump wins in 2028 and continues to stay in office is by the will of the American people. Okay? And the will of the American people is what the Constitution embodies. And so I think we're going to be in good hands there.
Okay, listen, I played a chunk of that because I wanted you to hear it. I'm not going to address it every single time we get a question over the next 3 years, I promise. But periodically, when an interview like this happened with The Economist. So it's not like just, some random podcast. The Economist is a leading publication around the world, has to do with the economy, obviously, as it sounds, but a lot of different policy. The Economist is actually a great read. I value my subscription to The Economist. I have a lot of them, but so this is part of the reason why this got a lot of attention, is that it wasn't just kind of this random, group of conservatives, brainstorming. It was in this sort of interview setting. Here's what the president said. And I'm going to get some of your thoughts too, but here's what the president said in response to that.
A lot of talk about 2028 and who will be at the top of the Republican ticket. Can you set the record straight? You're not going to try and run for a third term?
Well, I don't even think about it. I will tell you, a lot of people want me to run, but the difference between us and the Democrats is we really do have a strong bench. I don't want to use names because it's, inappropriate, but it's too early.
But
3
people
and a
do
quarter
like
years.
when you start talking about whether you like J.D. Vance or
I
Secretary
do like
Rubio.
J.D. Vance. I
or
like
Secretary
Marco Rubio. I like so many people. We have an unbelievable bench. We could run 2 people together. We have a great bench. So I don't want to start talking about elections. It's too early.
Okay, so here the president often answers this way, and this is the way that he answers questions. I mean, if you study him over the last several years, he always leaves himself like a little bit of room. It doesn't matter what he's talking about. There's always like a little bit of room somewhere where you're like, well, what are you really saying there? That's the way that he speaks. This is the way that he negotiates. This is the way that he presents himself. And you can see there, if you're watching it, even just reading his body language, he's talking about, who could be his successor. But you can't help but ask that question. Meredith said this: I don't want Trump for a third term, voted for him twice, and that is enough. So that is from a previous Trump supporter saying, listen, I don't want a third term. And actually, there's several of you, including Robin, who said no one wants a third term for any president. And perhaps this is really where we're going to land, which is this is not necessarily a partisan issue. It's a question about America. Ashley says this makes me incredibly uncomfortable. We have rules and precedent for good reason. Please follow the rules. So when someone's like Steve Bannon says, well, we're not going to follow the rules. Like, you're like, what does that mean? What does it mean? I'm not going to get into what potentially the ideas that could be floated, because there are several, but let's just focus on a couple of what's in front of us, okay? The 22nd Amendment, speaking of the Constitution, bars any person from being elected president more than twice. There's been a lot of attention on that word elected. So I'm just going to point that out. The amendment says any person from being elected president more than twice. So could there be a way that someone could be appointed president? We're not going to go there. This is what the 22nd Amendment says, okay? I'm going to read directly from the Constitution. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. No person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. So there's limitations here. Amending the Constitution would require 2/3 approval in Congress, both the House and the Senate, and a ratification from 3/4 of the states. So if we were going to change this rule, when it comes to the Constitution, it would be a process. Same process if we're going to change the voting age. Not an easy process, especially with the differences of opinions that are out there, but not an easy process no matter what. So this is, the Constitution is upheld with these amendments. We make certain changes throughout the years. This would require quite a lot of agreement from a lot of different places. So there is the one sort of quote unquote loophole that has been floated that I will indulge, is that some have suggested that President Trump could run as Vice President Vance's running mate. And then the vice president or someone could step down. And then, wait a minute, the vice president would become president, right? The succession line would take place. But apparently, the 12th Amendment prohibits a person ineligible to be president from being vice president. So, no, President Trump would not be able to be someone's vice president because he's no longer eligible to be president after this term. I mean, y'all, okay, that's where we're sitting today. But I just wanted to address it. So now you have a little bit from the Constitution. You can see it. Listen, the Constitution, going into the 250th anniversary of America, the Declaration of Independence, and having just viewed the Constitution in the National Archives, it really is remarkable how much we talk about the Constitution and how much it comes up in ways that maybe we didn't really think about. I was listening to the interview with Vice President Harris. I was like, wait a minute, why is it the voting? Okay, wait, it has to do with the Constitution. A lot comes back to the Constitution, the interpretation of the Constitution by the courts, and what does it mean to have the United States of America? So here we are. I do want to add, just while I let the last few comments come in live, I do want to play one part of the interview with 60 Minutes, and we can talk just briefly about that. I've gotten some questions about the style of the interview. There was a comment that was made just over the weekend. Again, we saw another quote unquote kinetic strike by the U.S. government on boats off the coast of Venezuela. The U.S. government says these boats are part of the narco terrorism trade that's taking place with cartels. And so these are enemies. So we're going to just more or less destroy them. We're going to target them. The president was asked about this, and he said something that I hadn't heard before about the significance of each one of these boats. Granted, there are those that are questioning the White House and the administration and the intelligence surrounding this, but I think it's important to hear from the president himself. So just take a listen to this.
Over the world.
We are going to talk
and
about
what he did to our country should never be forgotten. He had an open border process, and people would come in, and I'm not discriminating against tattoos, but people would come in with tattoos all over their faces and say, come on in, come on in, come on in. They let people in that should have never been. Venezuela emptied their prisons into the United States of America. And every one of those boats that you see shot down, and I agree, it's a terrible thing, but every one of those boats kills 25,000 Americans. Every single boat that you see that's shot down kills 25,000 on drugs and destroys families all over our country.
We will talk.
So I didn't heard that. I didn't heard, maybe it was out there, but I hadn't heard it. I don't know if you heard it as well. So every boat responsible for killing 25,000 Americans. This is the intel that the Trump administration says that they have. And this is what is being questioned by those in Congress, including some Democrats that say that they're not being read in on some of this classified information in a timely way. And obviously there's a shutdown, so there's a lot going on with this. But as this continues, I just want to make sure that you have that information. I got a great note on Instagram over the weekend that I really appreciated. It said this: I'd just like to thank you for all you do. I'm trying to watch 60 Minutes and it's driving me bonkers, listening to the hate and blame, which I truly feel goes on both sides. And then I thought, I don't have to watch this because I'll be able to listen to Jenna tomorrow on Scoop. But gosh, I admire you for all the content you have to consume and listen to the constant arguing. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. It's my pleasure to listen to the arguing. And when it's not my pleasure anymore, I try to take a break. What I will say about the 60 Minutes interview is that when you look at 60 Minutes, I think format and function are really important in journalism, and it's all being exploded because of what's happening with technology. So what you're seeing in 60 Minutes are 12 to 13 to 14 to 15 minute pieces, and sometimes separated into different parts. and it's being edited with a particular eye towards the news of that week or that moment. This is what happened with this particular interview with the president. So the interview happened on Friday. There was a lot of news that happened over that previous week. And then you had the 60 Minutes piece airing on Sunday. So what you actually saw if you were watching the television show is different than what now 60 Minutes is also posting, which is their complete interview with President Trump, which I will link to in our show notes. I think it's important to listen to the whole thing. Why not? Why not an hour and 15 minutes with the president of the United States? There were a few things that did stand out to me. The president still talks about the Biden administration a lot. And that's going to be a very interesting narrative to continue to watch, because as he gets into his second year, which he's not there yet, I'm wondering how that plays with the American people, even his supporters, because there's only so much you can continue to look backwards before there's a focus on forwards. So that's something, just as I was listening to the president, really stood out to me in this hour plus conversation is the references to the past. That said, a lot of the stories that we're looking at right now are connected directly to what happened last year at this time. So the umbilical cord is not separated yet. And this is part of the reason we're still in this period, which can feel a little bit like we're recycling a lot of topics and talking points. If you listen to the full interview, I think you're going to have a different impression of the way the interaction happened between Norah O'Donnell and the president of the United States. It felt a lot more conversational over the course of an hour. And you're going to see how the edits were made to quicken the conversation, because we got to get more in. If we're going to air it on a broadcast network, then we're going to need to do on podcast. So it does create a little bit more of what feels to be tension. When you actually listen to it, you don't really feel it. I've already seen criticism coming from the left that Norah O'Donnell was not tough enough on the president. Surely there'll be someone that says the other side as well, that she was too tough or going back to different things like inflation or whatever. You're always going to get criticized as a journalist in that position. The best thing I think you can wish for is that both sides criticize you, which means that more or less you're focused on the conversation rather than a particular political agenda or topic. These are tough conversations to have. A sit-down interview with the president of the United States who likes to engage and have back and forth. It can be tough to try to control the timing for each topic and how you're going to push back. And in general, for me as a journalist, what I think is the most important thing is access. So as you'll notice with a lot of my interviews, it's not about antagonizing or having an adversarial conversation with people. We don't have a lot of that here at Smarter News. I don't find it valuable to you. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I'm not interested in aggravating you. I'm interested in providing new information to you. And new information requires access. So sitting down with someone that is as important as the president of the United States is the first victory. The second victory to me is, how can I make this as conversational and interesting as possible? How can I get more information so you walk away feeling that you learned something, that you got something from the conversation? That's where the freedom of the press is, in accessibility, not an adversarial, antagonizing relationship, which is really about advocacy, meaning either advocating for a group or a certain point of view. Those are the interviews I don't think do a lot of good for anybody. I know there are some that believe that's what journalists are supposed to do. They're going to advocate for the American people and this and that. That's not what I believe. I think the more access you can have to those in power, the more you can actually listen to what they have to say, the more you're going to be able to make your own decisions about really big issues. And that's where the press supports a free nation, not trying to tilt it in one way or the other. So maybe we should continue this conversation. Take a listen to the interview. If you have time, if you're curious about what the president said, they covered a lot of different topics. And over the course of about an hour and 14 minutes, it really is chock full of information, and a tough interview, thinking about it right now, a tough interview to edit because of that. How do you pick and choose? What is the style? So I can give a little grace to 60 Minutes trying to figure out how to condense it down to fit their television format, when really, I don't think it's the television format that should be prioritized. I think you're going to reach a lot more people on podcast and social. I'd chop that interview up as much as I possibly could and push it all out there. That's what I would do. So curious your thoughts on that. And I'll be very curious your continued thoughts on dropping the age of voting to 16. I really hit a chord on that one, guys. Even with the 16-year-olds, which makes me feel good. So that's very interesting. And I'll continue to watch that story. And one of the things you do see a lot of, I'm seeing some questions here on the live chat, is about fact checking a president or someone live. That's very tough to do. For example, that conversation on inflation, very tough to do. But if you think about who you're serving, you can even stop during the interview and say, hey, I think we're actually talking about two different things, and actually talk through it. I think the audience respects you more when you try to clarify rather than trying to fact check. There's always a data point that can be used by somebody else to disprove your points. So what you need to do as a journalist is always go back to your reporting. If you've talked to people on the street, which would be a good thing to do before an interview with the president, you can say, well, the people that I talked to said this to me. And no one can dispute that. Otherwise, you get all this data that people are doing, backflips with it. And it's kind of a waste of time, quite frankly, to be honest with you. A lot of what's going on in the country right now has less to do with data and more to do with feelings. And when it comes to the American people, those feelings have to do mostly with feelings of, do they have liberty? Are they free? Do they feel empowered to pursue the American dream? It's really those bigger themes rather than these very specific issues. So those are my quick thoughts. Thanks for hanging with me on this broadcast. Thank you to all our insiders for your support. And I look forward to delivering quick, concise, nonpartisan news throughout the week on Smarter News, on social media, on our website. And always check out our weekend digest, which is really fun, a newsletter that slips into your inbox on Saturday mornings. And we kind of collect some of the stories we don't typically get to hit during the week. And we compile all of our reporting. So if you miss something, it's usually there and you can access it very easy. So I'll put that in our show notes as well. But thank you for your support of Quick, Concise, Nonpartisan News. Have a great week, you guys. Great start to November, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.